Welcome to Pennsylvania in Focus. I'm Eliana Kernodle. After a year of what residents call an underwhelming response to the toxic train derailment and chemical burn-off in East Palestine, Ohio, Norfolk Southern reached a settlement in a class action lawsuit this past week. Joining me to tell us more is Kristen Smith, the Center Square's Pennsylvania editor. Kristen, what do we know about this settlement?
Sure. So Norfolk Southern is offering to pay $600 million to residents living within a 20-mile radius of the train derailment. East Palestine is just a couple miles from the Pennsylvania-Ohio border. So there are people living in both states that would be eligible under these claims. Now, it still has to be approved by a federal court in Ohio, so this is not a done deal. But it was announced this past week. We're about 14 months since the derailment happened, which, for a refresher, Norfolk Southern had a train going through the area. It was carrying vinyl chloride and other chemicals. The train derailed, and the railroad decided that the best course of action to prevent more of a catastrophic explosion that would have hurt people was to burn off the chemicals in the 5 derailed cars. And the criticism has been ever since that was very toxic, and those fumes have caused irreparable harm to the region. And so this settlement is, in Norfolk Southern words, an acknowledgement of what harm has been done and their intention to make it right.
And what has Pennsylvania's governor said about this?
Governor Josh Shapiro, he's been critical pretty much since the day that the accident happened. He sounded the alarm about the derailment within hours of it happening, and this was something that took some days and weeks to trickle up to the headlines in the news. And so his response to this was to evacuate residents living on the Pennsylvania side of the border, and they were within a mile radius, the evacuation was a mile radius, but like I said, less than 5 miles from the train accident. And he said, the burn off was dangerous itself, so he wanted people out of that region. Fortunately, no one was hurt during this whole process. However, he was very frustrated by the decisions. He said that Norfolk Southern definitely prioritized getting their shipments back online, and they were worried about losing money, and they weren't really worried about safety at all. And this is something that President Joe Biden has also said. He was in the region back in March to visit the cleanup and the aftermath. And during a news conference there, he said that the derailment was an act of greed, not an act of God. And so he, too, has been saying that Norfolk Southern made some really questionable decisions, and we're concerned about the harm that has been caused to people in the region.
This comes as many residents have continued to say that the response by Norfolk Southern and government officials has been severely lacking, some saying it's as good as nothing. How does this settlement kind of fit into that larger picture?
Right. So there's been multiple hearings. There's been a federal investigation into the accident. There's a lot of regulators trying to get to the bottom of what happened here and exactly what the causes were. And residents in Pennsylvania, they recently met with a Senate panel to discuss this, where they continued to express these frustrations. Some of them had reached out to the railroad themselves and said they were getting nowhere, and had some very critical words for Norfolk Southern's CEO, calling him a puppet controlled by a board of directors. Others have described this accident as Ohio's Chernobyl. And there's been reports of, health conditions that have cropped up since in the last year. Now, it's important to note that there's been no direct connection between the derailment and some of the health effects that people have been feeling. But one of the residents who lives 3 miles from the derailment site in Darlington, Pennsylvania, she says that her husband, in the year since, has developed a rare form of breast cancer, on top of other very toxic chemicals being measured in their air and in their water, and, just truly permeating their environment. Norfolk Southern has never really acknowledged that those chemicals could have caused such serious cancers and other responses, but they have been investing money into the region, $110 million before this settlement, to do air and water testing. The problem is residents there don't trust them. They don't trust them at all, and it doesn't seem like this settlement is moving the needle on that.
Well, thank you for your insights on the story, Kristen. Listeners can keep up with this story and more at thecentersquare.com.
Knowledge is power, and you deserve to know what happens in your state government. That's why the nonprofit Franklin News Foundation is bringing you straight news journalism through the Center Square, reporting on state authorities and publishing stories that show where your money goes and who spends it. By supporting the Center Square, you can track politicians' use of taxpayer money and demand transparency from elected officials. This is how we can equip everyday Americans to hold their government accountable. Become a supporter of Franklin today at franklinnews.org/donate.